Like when you see people starting preps, John, like what's the biggest things that stand out to you as far as like the biggest mistakes in that portion of the dieting phase?
Yeah, at least on the initial part, and where I've made my own mistakes in the past, was just starting off the calorie deficit too conservative was a thing that I did, with the idea of like getting the most from the least. And then like, so you have some cards to play later on. Yeah. It ends up you save those cards and you have to play them all later on. And then you're like, damn, I just played my whole hand and I run out of time. So that was like the past situation of like, then you like get behind and you have to like get overly aggressive towards the end. It wasn't until later on where like, and even now, like we have like science coming out to kind of verify this on more aggressive deficits on the beginning of a fat loss phase when you have the greatest ability to maintain tissue, would be making sure you're starting the fat loss phase off like aggressive enough.
Yep. 100%. I think there's multiple things that you can look at too for this. It could be like the initial diet change, and kind of how you go about that. One of the things I don't like seeing, and we do see this in a lot of client plans, is too large of like caloric rotations trying to drive the deficit. Like they're very training performance logbook based, so they keep their training day food quite a bit higher, and then they drop the rest day food way down, thinking I can just drive the deficit by taking a larger chunk out of the rest day, which I think it's not long-sighted enough. Like it's pretty short-sighted move in regards to keeping a contest prep rolling throughout the entirety of the contest prep, because ultimately contest prep's just fat loss in a fatigue management state. Like you're pushing as hard as you can for fat loss to occur while keeping someone in a place that they can still adapt to the deficit. And this attachment to performance and attachment to logbook, while it's important for retaining tissue, we don't need to have such a caloric intake on training day be that differential from rest days, because those days that are off are also contributing to recovery capacity that is also going to contribute to your performance in following days. And so I'd rather see like a net change across the entirety of the diet. A lot of my clients too, like they'll have caloric rotations in all seasons for digestion purposes, but man, I'll borderline almost eliminate the rotation and caloric intake with the start of prep. Like it doesn't need to be super high, in my opinion.
So when you have that situation with a client, are you pulling most of the calories off of the training day to where then they get pretty close to the same, or is it just like a little bit less pulled off of the non-train days? Like how do you look at that for that particular client?
Yeah, typically it'll be pulled off of both. It's just a little less pulled off the non-training day. Sometimes I'll even pivot people into a single meal plan where the only differential is the intra-workout carbohydrate exposure. Like if they have intra-workout carbohydrate powder, it makes for execution to be really easy. They don't have any excuse to not be prepared. Like it's a quick and easy way to make sure the consistency is at a high level because their food's not changing day to day. Really the only thing is supplementation around training. So that's kind of how it goes. Like I'll start people with 20% deficit straight off the cuff, like no problem, like super easy. And it just gets them flying, because when I look at that fat loss chart that I make for people in either in their timelines if I want them to see it, or I make it in a document for myself if I don't want them to see it, what I'm doing is I'm watching that 1% rate of loss, and I'm wanting to get close to that 1% rate of loss for that first portion of prep, because that puts me in a position where I can run 0.5 or less almost at back end of prep, where it's like I'm not really even barely running fat loss to the last 4 to 5 weeks for most people.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point around, for one, how much are you pulling off the start? And I usually advise people, hey, don't go over 30% of a calorie deficit off the front of a prep. And if you're having to make that timeline, you probably want to expand your timeline out a bit longer, just because more aggressive fat loss phases as very well could be suited for over a short term. Over the long term is when you probably accumulate too much fatigue, and it wouldn't be sustainable across 16 plus weeks of a contest prep. But to bring to your point, like, hey, 20 to 25% could be a very good starting point. And if you do need to make up a little bit more of that, doing it off the output side, So a lot of times I'll bump up steps or add a little bit of cardio in, but the majority of that chunk coming from the diet. And, we're all trying to create that weekly rate of loss that's going to align for the timeline. And how we do that, there's a lot of flexibility within that. So you don't have to go to a straight every single day, being a diet monotonous, as that might psychologically not align best with the client profile as well. But for the clients that I have on like larger amounts of calories, where in the off season, you have to get pretty strategic with where you put food. So one client with really high amounts of food, training day, hunger is a lot higher. So it makes a lot of sense that we put a lot of calories into that day. So a lot of the food is coming off that day. And then the rotation is a much less aggressive, moving to the fat loss phase, versus maybe a female client on lower food, where it just really isn't that big of a rotation. And their output on a training versus a non-training day, it's not that vast. And what I found is the bigger you are, the more vast it becomes. Like a big body's burn a lot of calories. So, some people are like, you don't need more than 500 calories on a training versus non-training day. Like, dude, get to like 260 plus, forcing a body weight that you're not supposed to be at. Like, you will burn through it, and especially strong individuals that tolerate a lot of training volume. Yeah. So anyway, you have just some different tools to create that deficit. If you saw that question on the forum we had, someone asked, like, I'm going to the fat loss phase, I need to create my deficit. Like, how should I structure my high day? And it's kind of thinking a little backwards about it. Because you're like, well, you want a 20% deficit for the weeks. For instance, if you want one high day, like to add in another 10% of calories to that day, you need to make it up somewhere else. So you need to get like a 25% reduction on whatever, 4 days out of the week. And then it gets just really complicated. So you would have to align with that. I think some people, they don't even do that. They just take calories out of their every day. Then a high day gets kind of arbitrary of like, well, I'm going to double carbohydrate on this day. It's like, well, what about like what does that mean for your calorie balance for the total week? So I think that might get a little bit into our next topic, but too large rotations could be problematic for the recovery piece and managing fatigue. But some rotation could be plausible for those that have the psychological aspect that would benefit from a diet that would be less monotonous.